Hi, Shauna here from Dancing Raven Studio. Welcome to Acrylic Painting 101 Basics for Beginners. I'm so glad that you're still hanging in. Today's lesson is another painting for those boards that we primed from lesson 9 3/4. And we're going to be doing the sphere. We're going to look at how light goes on a round object, and then we'll paint the sphere. Grab your paint tools and let's get going. Part 1, how light falls on a round object. In this video, we're going to look at terminology of light around a sphere. We have local value 8. We have direct light on the left side plane. On the top side plane, we have indirect light. That's the light that's bouncing around the space. We have our shade side on the right side plane. And in the underplane, we have some reflected light bouncing back off of the ground that the sphere is on. We have two core shadows. Those are the deepest, darkest places on our paintings. One core shadow is right at the base of the sphere where it's connecting to the ground, and the other core shadow is in the shade side, closest to where the light cannot reach on the round object. And then finally, we have the cast shadow. In part 2, we will be changing the value on the ground and seeing how that impacts the light distribution. Pay attention to the reflected light in the underplane of the sphere on the shade side. Our fabric value is 10, which is white, and you can see how bright our reflected light is. Now we go to value 7 and see how the change has happened. It's already less bright, that reflected light. I'm going to go to value 5, which is a middle value, and you can see a hint of reflected light, but it has really dropped off. And then fabric value 0, which is black, and there is no reflected light at all. It absorbs all the light, and we have that lost edge on half of the sphere. We're going to move now to a local value 5 object, and we start with our fabric value at black, and you can see there's no reflected light. We go to value 5. In person, you can see there's a touch of light, but hardly any. Just a little touch of that reflected light in there. We go to value 7, and again you can see that it's building up and it's becoming a brighter reflected light, but it's still not really bright. And certainly not as bright as the local value 8 sphere. And now we are onto the white, and you can see the most reflected light. Still not as bright as when the sphere was a local value 8. I'm going to change this up so that you can be reminded of how bright the reflected light is on that local value 8 object. Part 3, modeling factors responsible for creating form. In this part of the video, we're going to explore how to create form on a round object. We need to keep in mind that a sphere graduates from 2 directions, from top to bottom and side to side. And to create the illusion of form, we need a minimum of 3 value changes in both the light area and the shadow area. Here are the terms that we're going to use for the light side of the sphere. We have our light paint, our middle light, and our dark light. On our shadow side, we have the light shadow, the middle shadow, and the dark shadow, which also could be called a core shadow. Dark shadow, core shadow is fairly similar. At the transition point between the dark light and the dark shadow, we have what is known as a halftone. We also have a highlight. Though it is not noticeable on the rough surface of the sphere, the highlight is the brightest spot on the object, and we have a cast shadow. The core shadow that goes underneath and anchors the sphere to the ground is as dark as the dark shadow is up higher. So these are the modeling factors that we will be considering while we do our painting. Part 4, painting the sphere in light. We have our image here and it's already drawn. I found this ball jar, which is exactly the right size, and traced around the jar with raw umber on my brush. I've made this image available with a gridded version on my blog. So we have to make some choices here. And one of the things I realized is acrylic is very difficult to work with. So what I created was half value steps all the way from value 9 to value 3. And that should give us enough paint to work with, and if it's drying quickly, we can manipulate and work around it. So now we're going to choose our values of everything that we're going to need for creating this sphere. We need 3 values of light, light, middle light, and dark light. We're going to need a middle shadow, a light shadow, and a dark shadow for the shade side. And then there's this half tone right along the terminus. And that's where the point where the light cannot go around the sphere anymore. So our background, I'm seeing it as a value 8. Let's come on to the light section for the 3 steps that we need using our Munsell accurate scale. I think of value 9, it could have been a 9.5, but we'll go with value 9 for simplicity's sake. And we're moving it along. And I think value 8 is the next place we're going to put the next value. And then we'll bounce them together and soften the edges of them. And then value 7 as the dark light. What we're going to end up with the value 8 is sort of this lost edge. Right in this area there will be a lost edge to the background, which will be kind of interesting. Now let's work on the shade side of the sphere. Now we're here to pick out the dark side. And what I'm noticing is that the middle dark, when I squint my eyes, is sort of a 3.5. The dark is a value 3. And as we go down, I'm seeing a value 4. I think that's a good place to start for that lighter area. And we can add more light as we need to. The light is coming directly this way, and if it was a smooth object, you would see a highlight right there. We have this reflected light that's bouncing back off of the fabric. So I'm also noticing that the cast shadow is pretty much that 3.5. And the darkest part is right underneath the sphere, and that looks like it's a value 2. And I am using special brushes. They're called professional one-stroke watercolor brushes from Winsor & Newton. They dry really well. I use blue shop towels for drying because they're lint-free. And I find them soft enough and they don't hold too much moisture. I'm going to use this sort of movement to soften the edges between the values as I'm working on this painting. And now we're going to work on the background. This is that value 8, and I'm just going to be careful and move along. I'm not worried about making the background look 100% perfect the first time. I'm going to come back and do a second pass of painting on it when I need to clean up all the edges and everything at the end. Now, honestly, this is a class sample. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. I'm paying attention to paint ridges so that I can make sure that the light won't catch on them weirdly. And once I've got all the ridges sort of gone, I'm going to take the hair blower and get it in here and dry it. I've sped it up so that it goes a lot faster for you. Now we're going to start on the middle dark value, and I'm going to do the whole side of that middle dark value, which was a 3.5. So I'm going to do the whole shade side of the sphere as a value 3.5. And then I'm going to bring in my brush and just clean up that edge. Because I've dried the background, I can come and do that and keep that circular feeling to it. And I'm going to make sure that there's no ridges. I'm just softening those edges. Again, with the hairdryer. Now I'm going to work towards doing the 3 values. So I'm looking at the shape of where the light is and how I'm going to move across with and planning that in my head, because I have to move really quickly. With acrylic, it dries so quickly that I'm going to be thinking about how I can do this and be as efficient as possible. So value 9 and putting it in place. Now, the other thing that will make it easier for you is if you can move your painting around so that you're always working in the area that's the easiest. And now I'm putting on the value 7, which is the dark light. And I'm putting it in place, and now the value 8. Now, if I've moved quick enough, the paint will still be a little damp and I'll be able to move along. But if you find that you don't move fast enough, you can just put a little extra paint there and bounce it in. So I'm moving from the light and I'm just perpendicularly softening that edge between the value 9, the light light, and the middle light. And then I'm putting a little bit more paint in because it started to dry. And I continue with the brush. In my blog, there will be a description of this brush so you can go and get it. And now I'm doing the value 8 into the value 7 and softening that edge. Working with acrylic does take a little bit of patience and skills before you can move fast enough. Now I'm coming in to put some of that value 8. And I'm going to soften it and use a little bit of that extra paint that I need to get rid of the edge. And bring it down and bring it into the other side. So I kind of have to go back and forth a little bit with this to get to where I want it to be. The value 9, the value 8, and the value 7. So I'm coming in with the value 9 again, the light light. And again with the middle light so that I can soften those two together and make them look like they're not quite aligned there. And I'm just pulling the paint to soften that edge. Now, we do have those half steps. You can put those half steps in there if you want, and that will help you to do it with a greater ease than what I've been trying to do here. I was experimenting a bit here. Putting a little bit more of that light value in and softening that edge. Softening the edge. So if you get too much paint on that brush that we're using for softening the edge, you're going to have to clean it off and dry it off, or have it, like I had 2 or 3 of them that I was working with to be able to create this illusion, this form. And I just keep working away at it till I'm happy with it. So now we've got the value 7. I'm going to just put a little bit more of that value 7 in. just to give me some paint to work with, and some of the value 8 next to it. And then come with those dried off brushes and soften that edge so that it blends in better. Certainly with other mediums like oil, that this would be much easier to do. Watercolor, I'm not so sure about if that would be easier. Yeah, just softening those edges between. Put in a little bit more of the value 9. So you can see how much effort it is to try and do this. It might have been very much easier to use the half steps and then build that up. So now let's go to the shade side. So we have a half tone that's in between, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. I'm cleaning up the edge between the value 7 and with the value 7. I'm going to come with that value 3.5 and I'm going to soften that edge with the brush to blend them together as best I can to create that half tone. Not an easy job to do with acrylic. A little bit more paint in there to sort of give me something to work with. And then bounce it back and forth. I think that's going to work better to create that half tone. And then I'm going to soften that edge with a clean brush. And you can see that I'm really scrubbing it to soften it. I'm not worried about the fact that I've gone over the edge. Slowly, slowly, slowly building it up. Oh, I'm trying to get that value 7 in there. Just softening it with a different kind of brush now. So I keep going back and forth. This is a challenging thing to do with acrylic. And so I'm cleaning my brush off as I'm working along. You can see I'm pulling it off. And then I'm going to just soften that edge with a clean brush. Come with my Simply Simmons, which is a firmer brush. Use my fingers. See if we can get that to where I want it to be. So it's a lot of pulling back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, till I'm happy with what I've got. Now I think we can move in and let's do the darkest part and the cast shadow. So let's do the cast shadow first. It's kind of a lost edge there. The reflected light will separate them. And then I'm going to bring in a little bit darker as we come closer to the sphere. And I've dried it so that it's ready to work with. So we're going to come with our dark here and work our way around, working on the shade part. So here we are with our dark, which is a value 3. And that is the darkest part of the sphere. And it runs along the terminus line, right along the edge. So I'm going to be very careful. You might find it easier to rotate it around so that your brush is coming the opposite direction as mine is. It's easier to manage when you can actually see your line and you're not having to come in and clean up the line that I'm doing. But I didn't want to keep switching it around because I think it would be much more difficult to watch if I'm flipping it the whole time. I'm just building it up nice and carefully and coming down, and I'm going to soften that edge just by pulling it out and clean up that curve so that the curve stays nice. Now we have some reflected light in here that we're going to do, and you can see it's quite a bit lighter than I'm probably even going to paint it. So I'm just going to come in with a value 4, or maybe that's the 3.5, just to soften that and get that build up again. That's that middle shadow value. I'm going to soften that so that it looks like it fits in there. It blends nicer. So I keep going back and forth. A little bit of paint, move it around. A little bit of paint, move it around, until I can step back and I see that it's doing what I want it to do. Now we come with the value 4. And I probably could have done it a little bit lighter, but I was just wanting to be gentle and careful with it and slow. There's more reflection coming into that, so we'll lighten that up. And I'm not sure how light I got it. I'm just putting some of that light in there and pulling it out and softening that edge with the brush. And put a little bit more of that light in and push it around and soften that so that it blends in as nice as I can get it. Put another layer onto the cast shadow. Everything is going to have at least 2 layers just because it makes it look nicer and tidier. And now that you can see that reflected light better, it seems to stand out a little bit more. And then we're going to bring in a small brush and do that value 2 that is just at that point where the sphere meets the ground. Use the brush just to pull it out a little bit and soften it and bring it back in and put a little bit more, cleaning up the edge and making it look circular. So there's a little bit of this push and pull, softening that edge so that it blends and looks good. I'm going to put my highlight here. I've reserved my white for that highlight. I don't want to use white anyplace else except for that highlight. Now I'm coming in to clean up the edges. If you can rotate your board, it will work better. I'm going to take my time. I've moved it quicker so that you won't get bored and say, okay, I've had enough of this. I'm trying to get rid of all of the raw umber that you can still see and still keep it round. It's much easier if you rotate the board. So cleaning up all the edges, doing a whole nother layer. I do end up with a little flat at the top because I'm not rotating the board, and that is a bit of a challenge when you're trying to manipulate a brush. So rotate your board when you're doing yours and it'll make it look much better. There we go. A nice little brush in there. Clean up those edges. I'm going to add some of the value 9 and just soften that in. And get rid of any of the ridges that are there. And I think I'm pretty happy with it. I'm standing back and looking and just making sure that there are no ridges, there's no paint blobs. And I'm happy with that. And we're done. Yay! To receive the handout for each of the lessons, head on over to my website, dancingravenstudio.ca. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next art video.